What if the walls of a house could talk? What if they could whisper the secrets buried deep within them? On Christmas night in 1996, something unimaginable happened inside the Ramsey family's grand home in Boulder, Colorado. A child star, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey, vanished in the night, only to be found hours later in the most chilling way imaginable. A ransom note, a locked house, a crime scene that defied logic. Who could have committed such an unspeakable act? And why does this case remain unsolved decades later? This is one of the most haunting and baffling true crime mysteries of all time. And today we're diving deep into the dark secrets, the twisted theories, and the chilling evidence that still leaves investigators divided. Was it an inside job? A perfect crime by an unknown intruder? Or a cover-up hiding something far more sinister? Stay tuned as we uncover every eerie detail of this case. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Crime Doc at your home for the darkest, most compelling true crime stories. Now let's step back into that fateful night. Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado was always something out of a holiday postcard. Twinkling lights adorned the picturesque homes, snow blanketed the quiet streets, and laughter echoed through the grand residence of the Ramsey family. Inside their lavish Tudor-style home, the holiday spirit was alive. Gifts had been exchanged, Christmas carols had been sung, and 6-year-old JonBenét, the family's golden-haired darling, had been the center of attention, her blue eyes sparkling with joy as she unwrapped presents and twirled around in a brand-new white nightgown. She was a beauty queen even in her own home, a child with a presence far beyond her years. As the night wound down, JonBenét was tucked into bed, her small arms wrapped around her favorite plush toy. Her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, kissed her goodnight before heading to their own bedroom. The house fell into a deep silence, the kind that only comes when a long, eventful day has come to an end. But that silence would soon be shattered in the most terrifying way imaginable. Sometime in the dead of night, something went terribly wrong. The morning of December 26, 1996 began with a scream. At 5:52 a.m., a panicked voice cut through the early morning calm. "We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please." The words were laced with pure terror as Patsy Ramsey, still in her robe, fumbled for breath on the phone with a 911 dispatcher. Her voice cracked with hysteria, her words rushed and frantic. JonBenét was gone. In her place, an eerie ransom note lay sprawled across the staircase. The note was not hastily scribbled as one might expect from a kidnapper in a rush. Instead, it was oddly long, over 2 pages, carefully written. The message was disturbing in its specificity, demanding an eerily precise sum, $118,000, a peculiar amount, one that seemed random until it was discovered that this was the exact figure of John Ramsey's recent work bonus. Something felt deeply wrong from the very start. Patsy had reportedly found the note first, its presence stopping her in her tracks. The words were chilling, addressed directly to John Ramsey, signed with a cryptic name, SBTC. The author claimed to be part of a small foreign faction and threatened dire consequences should the Ramseys involve the police. But despite this warning, Patsy called 911 almost immediately, her instincts overriding any potential fear of retaliation. As the dispatcher attempted to gather information, Patsy's voice grew more distressed. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," she pleaded, her breath coming in frantic gasps before the call abruptly ended. But in her panic, Patsy had reportedly failed to hang up the phone properly. The call remained connected for a few additional seconds, and in those moments, muffled voices could be heard in the background. Some investigators would later scrutinize this call, believing that additional, possibly telling words had been spoken after Patsy thought the line was disconnected. Within minutes, officers from the Boulder Police Department arrived at the sprawling Ramsey home. The house was eerily quiet, save for the nervous shuffling of the Ramseys and their family friends who had been called over for support. Officers noted that the home did not appear to have been broken into, as there were no shattered windows, no forced entry, nothing outwardly amiss except for the haunting note and the sheer panic that had taken hold of everyone inside. John Ramsey, usually composed and confident, was visibly shaken as he paced, his hands shaking as he reread the ransom note. Patsy, still in her robe, clung to a friend, sobbing uncontrollably. Detective Linda Arndt, who was among the first on the scene, observed the couple closely. Something about their reactions felt off, not necessarily guilty, but strange. Hours passed. There was no word from the supposed kidnappers, no phone call, no further instructions. And despite the explicit warning in the note, law enforcement officers began searching the house, looking for any possible clues. They checked doors and windows, searched closets and spare rooms, but found nothing. The tension in the house was unbearable, an unspoken fear hanging in the air. The note itself was baffling. It wasn't hastily scribbled or written in a panic. It was meticulously crafted, spanning multiple pages, and it had been written using materials from inside the Ramsey home. The notepad it came from belonged to Patsy Ramsey. The pen used was found in the same house. The police and forensic experts immediately questioned the logic behind this. What kind of kidnapper breaks into a home, avoids detection, and then takes the time to sit down and compose a lengthy ransom letter? The specificity of the ransom amount raised even more suspicion. $118,000 was the exact amount of John Ramsey's annual Christmas bonus. That detail suggested an intimate knowledge of the family's finances. As officers scoured the house for signs of forced entry, they found nothing. No shattered windows, no pried open locks, no footprints trailing through the fresh snowfall outside, except for those of the Ramseys themselves. The house was sealed and secured. How could an intruder enter, write a ransom note, and disappear without leaving a trace? The air inside the Ramsey house was thick with tension, and the police knew something wasn't adding up. The family claimed their 6-year-old daughter JonBenét had been taken, but the chilling part, there was no immediate evidence that she had been removed from the home at all. As officers and detectives worked, the hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Patsy and John, dressed in the same clothes from the night before, looked exhausted, frantic, and desperate for answers. Detective Linda Arndt, one of the first to arrive, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly and horribly wrong. And then came the moment that turned the case from a bizarre kidnapping into a nightmarish tragedy. Nearly 8 hours after the 911 call, Detective Arndt suggested John Ramsey check the house once again. She asked him and his friend Fleet White to search for anything out of the ordinary, perhaps a broken window they had missed, or some indication of JonBenét's whereabouts. John led Fleet into the basement, a cold, dark, windowless part of the house. He flicked on the light and pushed open a door that led to a small, rarely used room. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. There, lying on the concrete floor, was JonBenét. She was covered with a white blanket, a piece of duct tape over her small mouth. A cord was wrapped tightly around her neck, a garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush handle. Her wrists had been bound. The air around her was thick with the unmistakable scent of death. John let out a guttural scream, scooping his daughter's lifeless body into his arms. He carried her upstairs, wailing as he placed her on the floor in the living room. Patsy collapsed beside her, screaming and rocking back and forth. The officers in the house froze. This was no kidnapping. JonBenét had never left the house. She had been there the whole time, hidden in the basement while the police searched. The discovery sent a shockwave through the investigation. Why had the ransom note been written if JonBenét was already dead? Why had John gone straight to that basement room as if he knew exactly where to look? And most chilling of all, how had no one heard anything? As forensic experts examined JonBenét's body, the horror deepened. The garrote around her neck had been tightened with deliberate precision, suggesting her attacker knew exactly what they were doing. There were bruises on her body, and disturbingly, there were indications of possible sexual assault. The house, once a place of warmth, laughter, and privilege, had become a crime scene drenched in mystery. Officers whispered among themselves, theorizing and questioning. Was this a home invasion gone horribly wrong? Or was the truth far more insidious? Was the killer someone inside the house that night? The Ramsey family's behavior following the discovery only fueled suspicions. John and Patsy were inconsolable, yet their actions raised eyebrows. John moved quickly, making phone calls to his lawyer and a public relations specialist before even submitting to police questioning. Patsy clung to the belief that an outsider had done this, even as the evidence pointed to something far more personal. The ransom note, once a bizarre piece of the puzzle, now seemed almost like a taunt. Was the letter meant to stage a crime that never truly happened? Had the kidnapper been a ghost, or had JonBenét's killer been inside the house all along? As Christmas decorations continued to glisten on the tree and the world outside carried on, inside the Ramsey home, a nightmare was unfolding. The Boulder police had a crime scene, a ransom note, and a body, but the truth remained shrouded in shadows. And in the stillness of that winter night, one question lingered like a specter in the air. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? The ramifications of this discovery would haunt the investigation for years to come. The positioning of JonBenét's body in the basement suggested she had never been taken from the house at all. The ransom note, then, was a false lead, a cruel misdirection. But who had written it, and why? The investigators scrambled to regain control of the situation. The once straightforward kidnapping case had now evolved into a homicide. Officers attempted to cordon off the area and regain forensic integrity, but it was already too late. Dozens of people had walked through the home, unknowingly trampling over potential evidence. The house, rather than being secured as a crime scene, had been a gathering place for grieving friends and family. The delay in treating the home as a site of murder rather than a place of abduction had dealt a fatal blow to the integrity of the case. Detectives questioned John about how he had found JonBenét. His explanation was simple. He had been unable to wait any longer and had taken it upon himself to search places others might have overlooked. He described how he had opened the wine cellar door and discovered his daughter in an unimaginable state. Despite the tragedy unfolding before them, Authorities could not ignore the irregularities of the case. The staged appearance of the crime scene, the suspicious ransom note, and now, the fact that JonBenét had never left the house, these factors all pointed toward an unsettling conclusion. Was this an inside job? Had the perpetrator been in the house all along? If so, why? In the days following the discovery, tensions escalated. Investigators would soon turn their focus toward the Ramsey family themselves, scrutinizing their actions, their words, and their responses to the tragedy. But on that terrible morning, all that mattered to John and Patsy was the lifeless form of their beloved daughter. Their lives had changed irrevocably. Their home, once filled with the joy of Christmas, had become the site of an unthinkable nightmare. The search had ended. The worst had been confirmed. And for the Ramsey family, nothing would ever be the same again. The autopsy report on JonBenét Ramsey revealed grim and unsettling details. The 6-year-old beauty queen had suffered a severe skull fracture and had been strangled with a garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush. The medical examiner noted petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, a telltale sign of strangulation. But one revelation particularly shook investigators. There were indications of prior trauma, suggesting JonBenét may have been assaulted before her death. This chilling finding raised disturbing questions. Was this an isolated incident, or was there a history of abuse? And most importantly, did it point to someone within her home? From the outset, the case was fraught with inconsistencies. The Boulder Police Department was unprepared for a crime of this magnitude, and mistakes were made that would ultimately hamper the investigation. The Ramsey home was not properly secured as a crime scene. Friends and family came and went, possibly contaminating evidence. The ransom note, a lengthy and bizarre 3-page document found on the staircase, did not match standard kidnapping demands. Rather than a hasty note scribbled in panic, it was detailed and composed with an almost theatrical flair. It requested $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's annual bonus. Was this a clue, or merely a coincidence? Despite forensic testing, the ransom note led nowhere. Handwriting experts analyzed the note extensively, concluding that Patsy Ramsey's handwriting bore some similarities but could not be definitively linked. John Ramsey's handwriting did not match, and Burke, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, was ruled out. The note's peculiar phrasing puzzled investigators. It appeared as though someone had attempted to mimic the style of a foreign terrorist organization, yet it was riddled with inconsistencies. Experts questioned why a supposed kidnapper would spend so much time writing a note inside the house, rather than quickly abducting the child and leaving. This strongly suggested staging, but by whom? Further complicating matters was the state of the crime scene. JonBenét's body was discovered in the basement, hidden behind a door that police initially failed to check. Her father, John Ramsey, along with family friend Fleet White, ultimately found her wrapped in a blanket. Shockingly, John carried her body upstairs, further disturbing potential evidence. Why had he moved her? Was it grief, or something more calculated? His reaction seemed genuine, yet suspicions swirled around him and his wife. Investigators scoured the house for signs of forced entry. One basement window was found broken, but John Ramsey admitted that he had broken it months earlier after locking himself out of the house. The theory of an intruder quickly lost traction. There were no footprints in the fresh snow outside, no obvious signs of struggle, and no physical evidence pointing to an outsider. Yet, one piece of forensic evidence fueled speculation. DNA from an unknown male was found on JonBenét's underwear. This suggested the presence of a third party, someone outside the immediate family. However, the DNA sample was minute and potentially the result of contamination from manufacturing or handling. The Ramsey family's defense leaned heavily on this DNA, claiming it exonerated them, but investigators remained skeptical. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, presented yet another enigma. Throughout the early stages of the investigation, Burke was kept largely out of the media spotlight. When questioned, he displayed an unusual level of composure for a child whose sister had just been brutally murdered. Some investigators found his demeanor odd. Others chalked it up to the coping mechanisms of a young boy thrust into a nightmare. Whispers of sibling jealousy and rage surfaced in some theories. Some speculated that Burke, possibly in a fit of anger, had struck JonBenét with a heavy object, perhaps a flashlight found in the kitchen, which eerily matched the dimensions of her skull fracture. If this were the case, did his parents stage the crime scene in a desperate attempt to protect their son? Experts debated whether a 9-year-old could construct a complex garrote, and most deemed it unlikely. Despite persistent rumors, Burke was never formally considered a suspect. In the following weeks, law enforcement explored multiple avenues. The Ramseys hired legal counsel almost immediately, further raising eyebrows. Some saw this as an admission of guilt, while others argued it was a natural response to being under intense scrutiny. Police interviews with the Ramseys were tense, with both parents refusing to take polygraph tests administered by law enforcement. They later submitted to private polygraphs, which reportedly cleared them, but critics questioned the reliability of such tests. The town of Boulder became a hotbed of speculation. The media sensationalized the case, with tabloids offering lurid theories, some pointing to a dark conspiracy within the pageant circuit, others to a crazed fan obsessed with JonBenét's beauty and fame. A particularly bizarre suspect emerged, a local man named John Mark Carr, who falsely confessed to the crime in 2006. His confession unraveled quickly. His DNA did not match the sample found at the crime scene, and his story was riddled with inconsistencies. The world watched as yet another lead collapsed, adding to the long list of dead ends. As the years passed, the case grew colder. The Boulder Police Department remained divided on whether the Ramseys were responsible or if an unidentified intruder had indeed managed to slip into their home, commit a murder, and vanish without a trace. Theories ranged from an inside job to the involvement of a deranged outsider, but none could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. JonBenét's murder remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in American history. Each clue that once seemed promising ultimately led nowhere, leaving behind a tangle of contradictions, suspicions, and unanswered questions. For those who sought justice, frustration mounted. A child had been taken in the most violent manner, and yet decades later, the truth remained elusive. To this day, the question persists: who killed JonBenét Ramsey, and why? As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years, the tragic murder of JonBenét Ramsey became less of a straightforward homicide case and more of an enigma that gripped the nation. Public opinion shifted like a pendulum, swinging between different theories about what really happened on that fateful night. What began as a devastating loss for a grieving family soon spiraled into a case fraught with controversy, media speculation, and a growing mistrust in law enforcement. In the early days of the investigation, sympathy for the Ramsey family was abundant. The brutal nature of JonBenét's murder left the public horrified, and many assumed that law enforcement would swiftly bring the perpetrator to justice. However, as weeks passed without an arrest, the scrutiny intensified. Slowly but surely, the court of public opinion turned inward toward the very people who had tearfully pleaded for help in finding their daughter's killer. Whispers of doubt began circulating. Some believed that John and Patsy Ramsey knew more than they were revealing. The nature of the ransom note, a lengthy, bizarrely worded message written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, raised eyebrows. Handwriting experts debated whether Patsy had penned the note, though definitive proof was never found. The peculiar phrasing and excessive length suggested an attempt to mislead investigators, adding to the suspicion surrounding the couple. Another theory that gained traction was that JonBenét's older brother, Burke, had been involved. Though only 9 years old at the time of the murder, some speculated that Burke, possibly out of jealousy or anger, had struck his sister, leading to an unintended fatal injury. In this theory, the Ramseys, desperate to protect their son, orchestrated an elaborate cover-up. Proponents of this idea pointed to JonBenét's skull fracture, which suggested she had suffered a violent blow to the head. However, the presence of the garrote around her neck complicated this theory, as it implied intentional strangulation rather than an accidental injury. Despite the growing suspicions around the family, scientific evidence introduced an unexpected twist. DNA samples taken from JonBenét's clothing did not match any member of the Ramsey family. This revelation both cleared and confused the case. If neither John, Patsy, nor Burke had left the DNA, then who had? This finding suggested the presence of an unknown intruder, a terrifying possibility that meant the true killer could still be at large. Some theorists latched onto the idea of a predator who had targeted JonBenét, perhaps someone who had been watching her for some time. The notion of a break-in, however, was met with skepticism. The house showed no clear signs of forced entry, though an unlocked basement window was identified as a possible access point. Critics of the intruder theory questioned how a stranger could have entered the house, subdued JonBenét, written a ransom note, and staged the crime scene, all without waking the family. As theories and suspicions continued to evolve, one thing became indisputably clear. The Boulder Police Department had made grave errors in handling the case. From the very beginning, investigative missteps severely compromised the integrity of the evidence. When Patsy Ramsey placed the 911 call on the morning of December 26, 1996, responding officers failed to secure the home properly. Friends and family were allowed to come and go freely, potentially contaminating crucial evidence. Even more disastrously, when John Ramsey discovered his daughter's lifeless body in the basement, he moved her upstairs, further disrupting the crime scene. Key evidence was lost or mishandled. The infamous ransom note, found inside the home, was analyzed but never conclusively linked to any suspect. The flashlight believed to be the murder weapon was found in the house, but no fingerprints were lifted from it. The Boulder police, lacking experience in high-profile homicide cases, clashed with outside agencies, including the FBI. Disagreements over investigative direction led to infighting, with some officers firmly convinced of the Ramseys' guilt, while others leaned toward an intruder theory. Additionally, the media frenzy surrounding the case only worsened matters. The press latched on to every new piece of information, whether verified or speculative, further complicating the investigation. Sensationalist headlines painted the Ramseys as suspects before any formal charges were even considered. The intense public scrutiny put enormous pressure on law enforcement, leading to hasty conclusions and a failure to methodically examine all possible leads. Years passed, but answers remained elusive. Despite several grand jury investigations and renewed forensic testing, no arrests were ever made. Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006 after battling ovarian cancer, taking with her any knowledge she may have had about what truly happened that night. John Ramsey continued to maintain his family's innocence, advocating for justice and pushing for further DNA analysis in hopes of identifying his daughter's killer. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office publicly cleared the Ramseys, citing new DNA evidence that pointed to an unknown male suspect. This declaration reignited the belief that an intruder had been responsible, but with no new viable leads, the case remained unsolved. Theories continued to swirl in books, documentaries, and online forums, each offering a different interpretation of the available evidence. Even decades later, the case of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved crimes in American history. While some still believe the answer lies within the Ramsey family, others insist that the real perpetrator has never been found. With advancements in forensic technology, there remains a glimmer of hope that one day the truth will finally come to light. Until then, the mystery endures, leaving behind more questions than answers. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most haunting and perplexing unsolved cases in American history. More than 2 decades have passed since that tragic December night in 1996, yet the case continues to captivate the public, with theories, speculation, and unanswered questions fueling debate. Decades later, the case remains unsolved, a chilling reminder of how even high-profile crimes can defy resolution. Each year, new documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports revisit the evidence, searching for overlooked clues. Was JonBenét killed by a shadowy intruder who slipped away undetected? Did a tragic accident within the Ramsey household lead to a desperate cover-up? Or is the truth even more complex than we can imagine? The world may never know. But one thing is certain, JonBenét Ramsey was silenced far too soon. And the question still lingers. Who killed JonBenét? What do you think happened that night? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime.